Today on the MotoMan podcast, we're sitting down with a man who shaped what Mercedes becomes next. You don't know his name yet, but you do know his work.
Changing of the entire landscape of the business model, of the way we have to be thinking.
Then he learned a rule that scares all car companies and perfectionists.
One of the lessons I learned, though, that still sticks with me is spend money, not time.
This is the behind-the-scenes side of Mercedes. The decisions you never see until you feel them.
We've got about 100 people in Seattle working on the back end to these cars.
And he's teaching the Germans today what our future really rewards.
It's not who has the best idea. It's who's fastest and best at executing.
Dr. Philipp Skogstad, welcome to the handoff. How does a guy who, frankly, before you and I get too far down the road into today's episode, want to share a little bit behind the scenes about what you're going to see. You've now experienced 10 of our reimagined MotoMan podcast episodes, which have all been shot with our new state-of-the-art Sony Cinema Line gear. However, before we acquired that gear, we did shoot 10 episodes of the podcast with the old gear. We're calling those the Vault episodes. What does that mean for you today? The picture quality, it may not be to the level to which you've become accustomed. However, the audio, the post-production, and absolutely the storytelling is all the same. So while you watch this discussion between me and an amazing guest, I will continue on the top end of this, a bicycle with a Volkswagen motor strapped to it. You're not a car guy. You were the guy that got the car magazines, but you weren't looking for like racing Bentleys or Gullwings. You were looking for luxury cars. How do you go from being that kid to running research and development for an entire car company?
A lot of steps, certainly not planned in that particular order. I think it was more about following opportunity at the time, following passion and curiosity.
So let's step back. Let's go to where did you grow up? Because you don't sound like you're from Sunnyvale, California.
No, certainly not born there. Born and raised in Germany, just outside Munich. So some might call that the territory of another car company, even though the very first car I ever drove was a W126, the original S-Class, you might call it. And then came to the States actually for undergrad.
And where did you go to school?
So undergrad in St. Louis, Missouri, St. Louis University.
Quite a switch from Munich.
Absolutely. And it's a different side of America also than Sunnyvale, California.
Now, before you get to university, you're stepping over something. Your family has some American history.
Yes.
What was that American history?
So my dad was the result of a U.S. Air Force pilot who was stationed in Germany and married his German assistant. Now, going back a little further, by my last name, people ask, well, where's Dad from?
It doesn't sound German.
No, it's not German or American initially. It's actually Norwegian. And so U.S. Norwegian ancestors emigrated to the U.S. during the Great Famines. And then my dad was the result born in Germany. I was there. Now I'm here, married to an American. If one of our two daughters were to go to Norway, then the circle would be closed.
So were either your grandfather, who was the fighter pilot, or your dad, were they into cars at all?
They were. One story that I know, and you've got a beautiful Gullwing here, is of
Gullwing.
My dad as a child running into a light post.
In a Gullwing?
No, because he was looking after a Gullwing. So he, as a boy, was walking down the street and apparently got bunked because he was staring after a Gullwing. So I was typically the one who would take Automotive and Sport or the car magazines and look at when is the next luxury sedan coming out with all the new technology. Most higher-end sedans go plenty of fast for daily driving. But I thought it was cool, like when first cell phones had data transmission. My dad got a new car and with a cell phone in it. I actually worked on running a serial port into the center console from the car phone system in the truck in order to get an internet connection up front so that you could be in the passenger seat connecting your laptop to the internet. That was back in the 90s. When I think at a lot of car companies, some people were still saying, who would ever need internet in a car?
So let's not drive past this. This wasn't something that was a feature from the car manufacturer. This was something you dreamed up.
Yeah.
Which is now a thing today.
Of course. And so I thought back then it was useful on a long trip to be able to work on your email in the car on a laptop. So
did you get it to work?
Yeah. There was some troubleshooting. We're even going to Nokia, who had in the control box that was mounted in the trunk, they had a serial port there that the manual said you could connect the laptop to. I don't think they ever tried it.
Hold on a minute. What year was this?
Now, it was... That must have been mid to late 90s.
Okay. You're making me feel old because I was working in tech at that point. And I remember the laptops, they could barely plug into anything and you would dial up. You'd put a phone. So was that what you were putting into the laptop from the port in the trunk of the car?
Yeah. So you take, you remember the old RS-232 serial port that was kind of looked like a small version of the printer port, the parallel port?
Yeah.
And basically ran that from the trunk through underneath the carpeting and so on, up into the center console. In the middle of the center console, had put a surface plate on there, and you could plug it in, and then...
So let me get this straight. You took your father's S-Class apart that had a cell phone in it.
Admittedly, it was not an S-Class. It was the competitor product with the rings on it.
Who cares? It's either an Audi or a BMW or a Mercedes. Your father's, like, he wrote a check for this thing and actually paid extra money for a cell phone, and you ripped it apart.
Yeah, it was... Company cars are very common in Germany. So it was even a company car, but close enough. I mean, he had to justify the whole thing when returning the car.
And how much were you able to get this thing to work? Like, was it a consistent thing you would get in dad's car and check your email?
So the idea at the time was that if we were going on longer, like, family vacations, instead of him always looking for where he could connect and there's wasting family time when we would be sitting in a hotel lobby while dad was trying to connect to the local hotel's internet. The thinking was he could do that while we're driving. We're in the car anyways. We're driving from Munich to Paris. Use all that time, and when we arrive, you don't need to worry about your work stuff anymore. So always been trying to solve problems.
But would that create a new problem? Because back then, it's not like the tariff back then in Europe wasn't unlimited.
Yeah, but I wasn't paying for that bill.
So basically, you were running up your dad's cell phone bill.
Yeah, to help him out.
While hacking up his car interior.
Yes.
This is genius. I see why you run research and development.
Yeah. Now I even get paid to do it.
Yeah, this car actually kind of looks like your dad's car on the inside. It's got the computer. It's got the thing in the back with a serial port.
Yes, of course, now they don't let me do that. We've got much better trained technicians who do that and splice into the wiring harness. And
so how do you go from the kid that's rewiring his dad's Audi interior and cell phone system and running up the bill at the same time to getting to university in St. Louis?
Quite frankly, I applied to 6 top schools or so.
In the U.S. only?
In the U.S. only. It was from a very young age on, I thought in the US, especially the top universities, you have smaller classes, you have more interaction at an early point already with the faculty than you do have many German universities. With that kind of family history, there was always a US connection. I remember us spending summers on vacation in the US. So there was always this, maybe back desire for freedom, American dream that said, go here, study here. And my parents were very supportive of that. At one point, changed from the regular German school track to an international school for the last 2 years of my schooling in Germany already. So it was a natural move to come here. Of course, though, from Germany, you think you can get into some of those top schools. I applied. The best I got was on the wait list for one of those schools. And then it was a question of, do I do German military service, gap year for a year, since I was rejected in all of them? Or do I just kind of take as good as I can? And then took a database, ran best engineering school versus open deadline. And St. Louis University and Kettering, which is a very automotive heavy school.
Of course.
Came out as a 2 on top. And I then was like, well, St. Louis seemed kind of a cool place. I remember as a much younger kid, my dad once had a layover in St. Louis and bought a t-shirt for me in the airport. So he had something to bring home.
Did it say Trans World Airlines?
No, and it had the St. Louis arch on it. It said St. Louis. So, that was my connection to St. Louis. I hadn't really heard of Kettering before. So there I applied. 3 days later, I got a positive acceptance. And
3 days, that's a very quick turnaround.
Did
you tell them the whole story about rewiring the Audi?
No, I sent my application package there. I think they figured they wanted more international students and so on. So, that was a whole lot easier than most other applications.
What did you study there?
Mechanical engineering. So went there, clear mechanical engineering, but also already at that point had this interest in business. So I majored in mechanical engineering, did a certificate in business administration. And because actually you might know the name Wolfgang Siebard, he once told me, and I was talking to him, that really electrical engineering is going to be very important to go forward. So I took a couple of electrical engineering classes, also on top of the mechanical engineering, something I'm really grateful for that advice.
So when you're literally doing 3 programs of study in one university experience, did you have the idea that you wanted to be working in research and development or in technology or at a car company, or was it just like, I'll figure it out when I'm done?
It was always a dream, I think, even from high school onwards. I mean, I mentioned Wolfgang. He's sort of always been a role model in that regard. I thought cars, technology, creating something.
How'd you guys get connected?
Actually, we lived in the same town.
In Munich.
Just outside Munich, exactly. So it's a town called Starnberg.
Ich habe in Deutschland gewohnt. Ich habe bei BMW gearbeitet.
Okay, sehr gut.
Yeah.
So
I lived at Olympiazentrum,
okay,
outside the gate.
Perfect. So yeah, Starnberger See, nice area. I had the great privilege to grow up there.
Nice place, yeah. I took the S-Bahn out there. We went to the end of the S-Bahn every weekend. Checked out what's going on.
See, and I would go to Munich to go, I don't know if you remember an electronics store named Conrad.
Yeah.
That was in downtown and in the Tal.
Yeah.
And so I'd go there and buy things that I was then trying to make work afterwards.
I just put 2 and 2 together. And I think I'm dating myself right now. The year that you were taking apart your dad's Audi, I was doing an internship with BMW.
Interesting.
That's a little terrifying. Anyway, let's press on.
So I did an internship with BMW in 1998. How far apart were we?
Not far. That's all I'm saying. Not far.
Small world.
Crazy. So we kind of work together, you and I. It's a
So it really didn't take almost 2 years till we're here. We could actually go back.
Yeah, we could have done this in 1998.
Yeah.
We definitely could have. So you had the opportunity to have this mentor, which that's unusual. That's really unusual. Did he guide you in thinking, hey, Philip, you could go in this direction into the car world like I am, or you could go into this new magical place called Silicon Valley?
I wouldn't call it as a guiding. I remember one of the things that he's told me as I was looking at career choices is you always want to be at the core of the business. So if you're working for, in IT, you want to be in an IT company. If you want to work on cars, make sure you're in a car company.
But you weren't always a car guy.
I grew up very much as interested in cars. I really, so went to St. Louis, studied mechanical engineering because I felt it was a little more broader than purely automotive engineering, but with a goal to work on cars. I was there, helped start up the Formula student team, SAE student team in St. Louis. Then, upon graduation from St. Louis, went to grad school at Stanford. Totally.
So you got to one of those top schools.
So I did finally make it to one of those top schools. In fact, it was the third attempt because when I applied there, MIT accepted me for a full ride offer. A scholarship at Stanford initially declined me. And I
feel terrible for you.
Yeah, I was devastated. You can imagine my fraternity brothers in St. Louis had very limited sympathy when I was there. Poor me has to go to MIT on a full ride, but I really wanted to go to Stanford.
Yeah.
Then one of my professors at St. Louis University told me, well, just look at who signed the decline letter from Stanford. Contact them, tell them that you got offered a ride from MIT, and if they would be willing to reconsider. So I looked the name up, went online, found a phone number, called that person. The voicemail said, I don't check my voicemail, so don't bother leaving a message here, but you can send me an email. So I sent an email, making my case. Didn't hear anything. Then the day came where I had to accept at MIT, which I did. And then a couple of days, maybe a few weeks even, later I checked my mailbox in the apartment, and there was a letter from Stanford with the same date as the original declined letter on it, and with an invitation for an orientation program that had already passed at that point.
Yeah.
Signed by the same person that previously signed the decline. So then I was accepted.
What happened?
So they reconsidered.
But it's the same day as the decline.
Well, I think they just took the standard letter. With that date, they didn't bother changing the date. They didn't have on that letter like an auto date function that would move the date forward. They just had both.
So now hold on a minute here. I got to ask this question. You had this guidance, as we talked about, from Munich, but what was in your brain to have this concept? What are you, 21 at this point? 22?
Yeah, 22. Yeah.
Very few 22-year-olds know the concept of if you don't ask, you don't get in this world. You pushed it to probably the most extreme level I've ever heard of a 22-year-old. Was that innate in you, or did someone take you to the side and say, you need to strangle these people to get what you want?
Well, it was, like you said, it was that professor who suggested that. I think I tend to be pretty stubborn, as some people say. Maybe the optimists more say creative. I do remember actually, back when I was 20 or so, there was at the university in St. Louis a career fair. And I went there to look for internships. And the way I grew up, well, that is a job interview. And it's here different in California nowadays, but at the time, I took my suit, put on a tie to go to a university career fair.
Of course you did.
Looking for an internship. And ended up scoring an internship. Was at that company. And
what company?
It was SEI, Systems and Electronics Incorporated. Working actually on mostly defense pieces. But I later on, while at that company, was told that the VP at the time, Joe Pollard, he came back from that career fair and said, I met this guy. I don't know for what, but we're going to hire him. And I asked Joe at one point, so what was it? He's like, well, you just showed up. You were the only serious guy in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the kind of thing is like, just indicate you mean it.
That's a lost art today. Most folks don't think to ask. Most folks don't think to show up. Most folks don't think to back up what they say. Like, I'm going to do this and do it. I remember a lesson I took when I started doing rally. I did Target Newfoundland. Mm-hmm. And the lesson most people don't understand, they tell you this when you start training for rally. Mm-hmm. If you just finish, you'll be in the top 25%. And I can't help but thinking that lesson was with what you learned here.
Absolutely. And I think equally important, if every time, you blow a tire, something doesn't work the way you wanted it, don't give up and be creative of what are other ways around. I mean, I said, I'm a pretty stubborn guy. I find myself a lot of times just hitting my head into a wall.
Something that was innate in you, or did you learn it from an uncle, a parent, a sibling?
I have a reputation for when I don't get my way, trying to negotiate my way. So my parents at a very young age said that I would could negotiate and argument my way typically. So I think there was a recognition. My parents once said that the moment I was born, they saw a full human being there. I think that that's a very important thing in how I was raised, that I always had a real seat and voice at the table.
But it sounds like this is attribute we're talking about, when we're trying to focus on, this was inherent in you. It was nothing you learned or was taught. This was just Philip in his DNA.
I think DNA, but also it's something you try, there's Dave Kelly, founder of IDEO, the product design firm. You might be familiar, Stanford professor. Yep. There's a great TED Talk by him about creativity and how we're all born with creative confidence. As our parents, it is schooling that kills that. Have you ever seen a 3-year-old who doesn't like to dance? Who doesn't think that they are the best artist? Who doesn't think that they are the best singer? And it's over time that we are taught by parents, by society, that there are others better at us, at something, and so on, and that confidence gets killed.
So would you credit your parents with not stifling that in you?
Most of the time. My mother will dread when I say this on the show.
I got you in trouble last time with your wife, too, so I'll get you in trouble with your mother. Happy to do
that. I remember at one point, I think I was going through puberty, voice changing, and we were at church, and my mother would say, just move your lips. Sounds better. So ever since, I've made sure that when I sing, I'm by myself.
Yeah, please don't sing. Let's get back to Stanford. What happened at Stanford?
So back to your question. Were you a car guy? So I made it then into Stanford, and it was already year prior to applying, I wanted to go to Stanford. I wanted to do automotive. So Chris Gerdes, in mechanical engineering at the time, was a very young, fresh professor who was working on automotive control systems that were in the order of lane keeping and so on, things that we now know as ADAS systems. And I was determined to work for him, work in his labs, working on control systems, really enjoyed my controls classes in undergrad.
And this was before the time Volkswagen put that lab in there?
Yes, that was before Vail. So the Volkswagen Automotive Innovation Lab. When Chris started his own lab, and I did actually have was part of when Vail was created. In fact, I went even to Volkswagen and helped set up some of the collaboration. But so wanted to work with Chris, and then I met a professor named Larry Leifer, who was actually, so I mentioned earlier Dave Kelly. Dave Kelly was Larry's first PhD student, also Larry's first dropout, and that instead of finishing his PhD, he started IDEO. But so I met Larry, who was this very artistic, creative kind of guy who was interested in what I call the meta engineering. We're just looking at how do you engineer engineers to be better engineers? And how does new ideas get created? What makes a high performance engineering team? And I was very fascinated by this because to me it was about creating the platform that would enable innovation. And as mentioned earlier, I had this interest also in management, back to that certificate in business administration. And so I kind of that moment changed tracks and decided to pursue this engineering design methodology. Worked closely with Larry, ended up to help teach as a teaching assistant to some of the design courses. Then helped run his lab as the executive director. Then also ran the entire center that Chris Gerdes was also part of. And from a business perspective, while being a PhD student. And then actually Chris Gerdes ended up on my
business, or meaning you like the idea of running a business, or you wanted to be in leadership roles? Two different things.
So, I agree. So one, I always like to lead projects. I think there was some natural way, back from an early age on, school and so on. I was not the ringleader, but more the person who wanted to get something done, and then looked at who can help make that done. So that kind of aspect of leadership, which I think is a true aspect of leadership, not the just kind of managing. The other aspect always being realizing you're not gonna last long if you're not making money in the end. So
very insightful. So as I think Silicon Valley was not good at
times.
Well,
sometimes better than
I
others.
was there because I was there through 2001.
Exactly. And I mean, we're seeing some of that correction also happening right now. And when I arrived in Silicon Valley in 2003, that was more the licking the wounds from that crash.
Oh yes, sir. I remember it well.
One of the lessons I learned, though, that still sticks with me is spend money, not time. I think that's an important insight that a lot of the rest of the world does.
I could go off on a tangent because that's a lesson I had to learn very hard, but expand.
I've seen in a lot of, this might be a little bit stereotyping, but a lot of especially European companies, the aspect of the best idea counts. And time doesn't matter as much. And frugality, right? Especially in a Swabian culture. That is a virtue. Silicon Valley is more just break stuff and believe in the fast execution. So it's not who has the best idea. It's who's fastest and best at executing. And in order to accelerate, you got to spend money. And if you look at a lot of startups that are in Silicon Valley, they're just being inundated with money from VCs.
So you're saying that money is kind of like the balance between the perfect product and execution.
Money enables the execution. And I think, especially in other areas, German, Swiss craftsmanship is more about the person who will take the time, get it right, but it doesn't matter as much if you're 2-3 years out. Silicon Valley is more VC, venture capital, return driven. You're gonna get a ton of money, but you also have to have that return in 2 or 3 years.
More money, you're not going to get more time.
Exactly. And that's a mindset that is really in there. And I think that is something that I learned in Silicon Valley. And where I enjoy also being at that intersection. And I say enjoy, there's plenty of days where it feels like painful.
Very painful.
But in the end,
yes, sir.
I like to believe I'm taking the best of both worlds and connecting the two worlds. And that is also a key part of my role today.
So you came out of Stanford with a PhD.
So I came out of Stanford with a PhD in mechanical engineering, then with a focus on what makes teams better, what is the role of leaders, of experts in that. And I had in between taken a little over a year leave of absence from Stanford, where I was building up a design thinking curriculum in Switzerland and at the same time doing an MBA. So there I was.
You're a real underachiever. That's what I'm thinking.
So I think I was like 28, 29 with 3 graduate degrees, but relatively little experience in the real world. And then somebody at VW, because I wanted to still get into automotive. So I was talking to Burkhard Hunke, who at the time was leading the electronics research lab, who then connected me to other colleagues who were at Volkswagen of America and Herndon. Torsten Karnal was, who then became my boss there.
So the first real job you got after collecting degrees like other people collect stamps was with Volkswagen of America in Herndon.
Yes, and it wasn't even a real job because initially they're like, what are we going to do with this guy who's got way too many degrees and way too little experience? So they offered me an internship. And then their HR said, well, you can't offer somebody who's really graduated an internship. So they brought me on as a contractor.
Doing what?
So I was in product strategy, doing a very interesting project at the time on total cost of ownership and comparing what goes into total cost of ownership in Germany versus the US. And how do you predict that for future models? So, back to engineering, strategy, cost.
And what value is of that to the car manufacturer?
Well, Edmunds.com, where you can see here is my total cost of ownership. So as a car manufacturer, you want to score well on that. And you want to be able to, whether it is for the customer, what your customer looks at, what it is for you, especially if you're running lease programs where the residuals come out, when you're working with insurance companies, how would our repair costs, all these things.
But wouldn't you have that kind of data already through the warranty claims? Because you say, in all fairness, like, I love you, man, and I love Volkswagens, specifically GTIs, but I'd never own one past the warranty because that EA 888 blows up the minute the warranty expires. And they know that. I would think they would know this from warranty claims.
Well, so what I was looking there is actually what was the total cost for the customer? Let's say you buy a car, going to have it for 3 years, put on, say, 50,000 miles. What is going to be your total cost for those 50,000 miles? From the initial purchase to the sale of the car, so the depreciation. How much are you putting in terms of insurance costs? How much are you, which are a function also of what the repair bill is? How much are you putting into maintenance, which is a function of what the maintenance intervals are? How much are you putting in gasoline, upkeep, all those things? Once you add that up, and so the automotive companies are very much looking at that in order for to have the best value for the customer.
I get that, but I feel like many car companies don't do that nowadays. Because you look at a lot of cars, they're too complicated. They're too delicate. And they're like, just think of the suspension on this car.
Mm-hmm.
You and I both know it's going to cost a lot of money down the road, at least past the warranty to fix. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't they simplify things if they know this information?
I think you're hitting on a point of just engineering progress. I mean, taking that to an extreme. If you want cheap transportation, get a bicycle. And you know that a bicycle with more gears and thinner tires is probably going to cost you more in the initial purchase if I get my carbon frame and if I...
Do you think that what we just talked about, that concept of spend money, not time, has now permeated into the car world?
Well, so the higher up you go, the more performance you want out of them, the more it costs to create. I think you get what you pay for. I'm firmly convinced. And of course, the more you're pushing the technological boundaries, the more likely something is going to break in the end. So you can do, as a mechanical engineer, we learn about safety factors. When you're designing an airplane, you're talking about 1.0 something or 1.1 something. We're surrounded here by airplanes.
Yes.
To be light,
it's all run on pneumatics.
To be light, they can't have a big safety margin. If you're designing bridges, you're talking about 12x safety factor. And I think that's a trade-off where for every one of these sports cars, to be that high performance, they need to push the limits. They need to make them as light as possible, and eventually that part will fail.
But it sounds like it's changed. It sounds like the ethos that you learned throughout your education and now applied through this first, I guess, sort of pseudo-internship at Volkswagen, that's now taken over the car world. You get more complexity even in basic transportation. It's even in a Toyota now, it's not basic.
Absolutely. Which is driven by consumer demand, regulatory demand. I think we're expecting, going back to the internet point in the car. 20 years ago, who would have asked for internet in a car?
Only you.
Today, you expect that.
Yeah.
It should be standard. If you look at the emissions control systems, how complex they are today. There's, I think, very few car companies who want to put all that stuff in, but they're required to do so.
If we were to break it down by percentage of the stakeholders who are asking for these changes, what percent would be the OEM, what percent would be the consumer, and what percent would be government?
I'm going to be cautious giving a percentage. Not because I want to hide it, but because I think depending on your lens or what argument
you want Brussels and Washington to come murder you. That's what it is.
Not so much that. It's just it's, I think, a matter of opinion on some of this. But I would argue, back to that point about business, the OEM's interest is to sell you the car that you want with the most profit for the OEM. So there is a natural interest.
Is it that simple nowadays?
If we talk about passion and, going back here to that going to this car, these cars are about more than getting from point A to point B.
Agreed.
There is a level of comfort. There is, Mercedes stands for a luxury, for prestige, but also for safety. I think especially with a lot of the technology that we have out now from our ADAS system, from the Drive Pilot that we've shown, their systems are about giving you your time back, your relaxation. When I look, today, when I drive with our level 2 system, I do not have constantly this fear that the person in front of me is going to slam their brakes right while I'm looking here at a flower or something, and the scenery.
You're looking at flowers when you're driving, huh?
Yeah. I mean, do you constantly look at what is right in front of you?
I do, actually.
I enjoy my environment. I have my peripheral vision, but I also have, my wife, my kids in the car.
I believe more than flowers.
I would be lying if I told you that I am 100% of the time looking straight at the car in front of me. And I've come to the point where I refuse to take a car on a long road trip that doesn't have a proper ADAS system. Because between the lane keeping, the distance keeping, makes such a difference. That is for a customer, giving them energy of their life back.
All of us here at MotoMan are super excited to not only have the podcast back, but for it to be its own show. And there we look to you for a little assistance. Can you help us grow the show? 2 really easy ways to do that. First and foremost, if you're reaching out via YouTube or other streaming platforms, you click on subscribe, notifications, or more importantly, share these episodes with your friends, especially on Reddit. Now, if you're downloading these episodes, listening via podcast platforms, we'd ask you to rate us. The stars are wonderful, but leaving a written review would be even better, especially sharing who was your favorite guest. So with that, I am incredibly grateful for your assistance in help growing this. And now, back to the episode. Okay, we're jumping ahead a bit. We got to still go back to this Volkswagen.
So
you're doing the warrant, you're looking at all this data, you're putting the cost of ownership together. Did they do anything with that data? Did they make their cars more reliable?
So at the point in my time, my primary focus was on, first of all, building a system. So maybe that led a little bit also to other steps, but building a system that would take existing data and start predicting, if you could say, put in certain parameters, what a future model would have as total cost of ownership and how it would compare to competitors. So think of your Edmunds.com table.
Yeah.
And let me put a car that doesn't exist yet into there and simulate where that would end up. So that was one aspect of this project. The other aspect was teaching people in Germany of how the US has very different cost factors than Germany. Classic example, in America, your insurance rates,
much higher.
Well, that yes too, but are determined by historic repair costs and collisions of this kind of vehicle. So if you have a new model, even if you engineer it to make it much cheaper to repair, you're initially being hurt.
Because there's no data.
By the history of that model with the same name. In Germany, there is a very clearly defined rule set by which the insurance companies will classify a vehicle. So they will look at how many screws does it take to remove a bumper, as an example. That will define then which class your car is being put into, that then relates to the cost by which they do. So you can actually really take an engineering approach to improve the total cost of ownership, the cost of insurance, by engineering towards that. You can't do that so directly in the US. As a trying to explain to a German engineer, you can't pull up the rule book over America and say, if I do this, then I'm going to be so much better.
Did they understand the concept of different liabilities here?
It's, I think the legal systems in the US and the mindset of that compared to most of the rest of the world are dramatically different.
It is.
Where you have, in one case, very prescriptive law that will also protect you. In the other case is case-based law.
Very much so.
That looks a lot at precedents, but does not offer any protection at all. So, and I think that makes you in the US very much open to lawsuits. In fact, I say if you're not getting sued, you're not relevant. But it also allows you to have a lot of innovation because there aren't rules that are restricting you as much.
Okay, so this concept of trying to predict ownership, total ownership, is that still something you use today?
Oh, absolutely. We do some form of that. Every OEM who wants to do well in Edmunds or others will do that. And for many other pieces, it's even important. From if you have car fleets on your own, from your residual values and others.
So what happened after Volkswagen? Where'd you go?
So after Volkswagen, I went to SAP, Enterprise Software. Absolutely. Volkswagen was 2010, and at the time, Automotive. It was, we just had the mortgage crisis. Automotive, even though I had worked some or interacted some with Sebastian Thrun when he was doing Stanley and then later Junior at Stanford, that scene was really still very, very far out. The automotive industry was looking down a very deep black hole. And I get an opportunity to join SAP as a junior assistant to the head there of product and innovation. And so being a contractor at Volkswagen on the East Coast, or joining SAP working in a board office in Silicon Valley, it was a very quick decision.
And you weren't fussed about leaving the car world.
So at the time, it was a conscious decision, and I mentioned earlier, you want to go after opportunities to learn, and it felt really there. That was an opportunity to learn at an accelerated pace, and leaving Stanford 2009, 2010 also being a very difficult time in terms of entering the workforce, lots of layoffs. So that was a great opportunity. And then I was at SAP for about 7.5 years, different roles, kind of on a 12 months interval.
What were 3 key projects you worked on there?
So I think what I would say the longest lasting, emotionally most meaningful project was building up an early talent program. We actually brought recent graduates into the company, and to this point of sharing your own insights, sharing with them. I just actually 3 days ago had one of them from the first cohort send me an email inviting me to their wedding.
Wow.
So
getting old, Philip.
So that's when you have that kind of impact. I think that's important. Another one was that inspired by a lot of how we did things at the Stanford D School in Silicon Valley, changing the work environment in SAP development offices around the world. Related to that also, that we switched for a lot of SAP developers towards GitHub, different tooling system, code repository. So when you have 15,000 developers that used to be totally in a island world, very proprietary, and move them into this how the rest of the world does development.
That's gotta be hard because
Is
developers are like bats. They like to be in the dark and hang upside down or something like that.
it was interesting in that most of the developers were using these tools in their private time, but it was in their company time they had a completely different mindset. And then I think there comes also this engineering pride of, if we make our own system, we can make it just a little bit better. But as engineers, we often forget about, well, what is the opportunity cost of that? And so that shift was actually the hard part. And the hardest part is the change management that comes of it, even less so with the engineers, but with management. Because with that, you need to have processes like, what is your governance structure when you want to release something? Do you by default, as a developer, get to release and somebody can block you? Or do you by default are blocked and you have to convince somebody that you are ready to release? And that's a very important mindset change. And if you look at Silicon Valley and work fast, break stuff, fix it later, it's very much this mindset. Well, I can decide when I'm ready. I'll put it out there, and I'll then, if I see it needs to be fixed, I fix it.
And did it net positive results at your time at SAP?
I think so. Went on a very personal level. I learned a lot. It prepared me in many ways for the current role. As over step also, you learn more what I didn't prepare you for, and the job we continue to learning. But I also, continue also to get feedback from people of the impact that
did it translate to a more profitable, a more efficient, a better SAP?
So we managed during that time and led the global development process organization through a change where the typical release cycle was 36 months or longer to being 90 days or shorter, in some cases weekly releases on my watch. So
it's a crazy change.
That's, yes, and that requires you not just to automate more, that requires you to fundamentally change your mindset. That's why things like governance structure, those are the hardest things to change.
And would that get SAP into more businesses because they were moving at such a quicker pace?
So that and it allowed the company to continue to survive compared to some of the newcomers. During my time at SAP, we went from selling a product that was shipped to a customer to providing a service in the cloud. We went from these long release cycles to very quickly. The mindset shift in the old world was, I have to make my product 100% because I have such few release intervals and it costs so much to implement it. The new mindset is, let me get it out as quickly as I can and then fix it as quickly as I can.
Is there any part of the old mindset that you feel still has a place in today's business?
I think so. Going back towards the automotive industry, when you look at where some of the newer players and where are the traditional OEMs, A lot of the newer players, they come at this. This is like a phone. We're gonna ship it. We're gonna fix things by tomorrow,
Yeah.
and the customer is happy that a problem got fixed. Traditional OEMs come from the perspective, we're gonna get something out. It's in the field. I get a very limited margin on this. If this needs to go to the shop, to your point about warranty cost, that's going to eat up my margin very quickly.
Absolutely.
I'm not profitable. And if I put in a mistake, the life of my customer is at risk. Very much these two extremes. I think that's where both ends need to learn from each other. I think the newcomers are seeing as they're growing, scaling up. You're seeing some of the headlines about NHTSA's investigations right now, saying maybe we need to apply some more scrutiny. At the same time, we're seeing the traditional OEMs, our customers expect that we continuously deliver software updates to our cars today. And Mercedes, we're updating the software over the air. Some functions driver facing, other functions in the back end when we can improve them.
Do you feel that a newcomer, well, let's just call it out, a Tesla, gets more of a pass than you do in terms of this turn and burn type of cycle of coming out with new revisions?
I would say in part it is also based on the customer base. Tesla is still at the point of being a cult. And we've seen, you've been around long enough, also the valley, of when Apple was a cult.
Oh, I still think to some extent it is.
To some extent it still is, but there was a time when it was a very small market, a small user base, and people were firmly convinced. I mean, it was almost like a religion.
Absolutely was. That's when I worked there.
And they could do anything. And their followers wanted it. And it's now scaled up so much that, well, they need to deliver to what everybody wants. And I think that is when you're a cult, you have these people who believe in you and who think that everything that is great, that you do is great. And the more, as you go bigger, as you have more interactions with others, and as more people have interactions with your product firsthand, you have more masses being able to scrutinize you.
It's like that old book, Crossing the Chasm.
Yep.
They have yet to cross the chasm.
And I think there is multiple of those chasms.
Oh, absolutely.
Production hell, delivery hell, and so on.
I remember the days when we would introduce something at like Macworld,
yeah,
and they'd say, this new computer's great, and then you wouldn't get it for 6 months. Not anymore. They're better at it than that, but I lived through it.
Yeah.
So talking about crossing the chasm, SAP, back to the car world. How did that come about?
Well, so I was at SAP, coming on 7 years. I had before mechanical engineering training, been a car guy. To me, SAP, the interest was about the people there. And that is what motivated me. Great colleagues there. SAP has an amazing culture. And someone kind of came this, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? Or do I want to do something else?
That's a good question we all have to ask ourselves. What do you want to be doing between now and dead?
Exactly. And I was like, well, probably not this. So, meanwhile, the internet has moved on a little bit back from when I was hacking cars. Or my dad's car, at least. And a LinkedIn account. So I updated my LinkedIn profile. It was, in fact, I very much remember we had our daughter at the time was, I think, 7 months old. And my wife's best friend had her bachelorette party. And so my wife was gone for the weekend. I was alone with a 6-7 months old. And it was a major achievement that both of us made it through the weekend.
You realize you paint a hell of a picture of the way your wife looks at you. She thinks that you're a bad designer and now can't take care of children.
No, she had full confidence that I could do this. It was more me being afraid of doing it. Till today, also, she has no worries that I will keep the girls together and everything. It's more can I do it to myself? So I think I have the one with the confidence problem there. I spent that weekend updating my LinkedIn profile and put in a couple of keywords, and then a little while later I get a LinkedIn message from a headhunter who was interested in finding somebody for a senior leadership position in a premium car company. And that got the ball rolling to the current role. So one of those
and you
people
hired in as CEO of Research and Development North America.
Exactly. So
that's quite a switch from what you were doing at SAP.
Yes, in many ways. Also a lot of continuity. Again, this changing of the entire landscape of the business model, of the way we have to be thinking. The software being more and more important to the vehicle, not just inside the vehicle, but also in the back end. We've got about 100 people in Seattle working on the back end to these cars. And that's a
lift out. Did you hire them from another company, or did you build that team organically?
We built that organically.
That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, and that's been, so we started, that office was started, we just had our 5-year anniversary, so that office was started about 6 months before I joined.
You realize your Munich competitor did it with a lift out. They hired a whole group from Microsoft in Chicago to do the same thing you're doing.
There's different approaches. Volkswagen also has an office in Seattle. So I think we're all in the end trying to achieve very similar end results.
I think everyone gets that. But just to kind of put a bookmark in what you were doing at the time, when you hired on the now last generation E-Class, which just came out. So that was that new paradigm where it was the one screen, really two screens that looked like one.
So when I had joined, we were just then launching MBUX
in the E-Class,
the A-Class.
2017, right?
Yes. So I joined November 2017.
Yeah.
And
I'm thinking before MBUX. I'm thinking it's the first.
Yeah, that was the
of the flat screen.
Yes.
And then the A-Class took it to another level with the actual assistant.
Exactly, and with a touchscreen.
So did you have
the E-Class didn't have
an impact on that E-Class, or starting with the A-Class?
So certainly not with the E-Class. With the A-Class, then incrementally, a lot of those decisions were made before me even. But then going forward, my team now, zero layer, that's in the S-Class EQS. That was actually most of the work, our team in Sunnyvale that did that. And
are you aware that Toyota kind of ripped off your idea?
To me, the best compliment is if somebody tries to replicate it.
Yes. My former boss used to say, thieves borrow, artists steal.
Love the phrase.
That's
great.
Made him famous, didn't it? So if you get back to MBUX and the A-Class introduction, what was the lesson you took from that? Because you did it different than everybody else does. It's like, if you're going to take that kind of technology, even even Mercedes used to say, it starts in S-Class and goes down. You did it the other way, bottom up.
Mhm.
Why?
If you go, what is your customer looking for? The A-class customer
Younger.
is younger, more tech savvy, is expecting their car to have these things.
Did everybody in
And-
Mercedes understand that, or did you have to sell it?
So those decisions were made actually by Sajjad Khan and the team before I joined. Sajjad was the one who hired me into Mercedes, into that role. He was the chairman of R&D North America at the time. So he understood that very well. And I think to me, the parallel is, if you look at Facebook, having started on college students.
Good point. Touche.
So I think it's, depending on what you're introducing, sometimes you want to start at the high end of the market. Sometimes you want to look at what is your customer most looking for. Tesla, Silicon Valley company. Silicon Valley is all about tech and is about green. That's where they started. That was where their customer were, and that was people who wanted to spend their money. They wanted to be luxury, but they wanted to be green. They wanted to be techy. So once you know who your customer is, go after that. And I think if we had started the traditional path that you described, if we had introduced MBUX in the S-Class, chances are we would have gotten a more negative feedback that would have maybe stopped us from rolling it out further.
Oh, I would agree with you. When I finally drove the 223 S-Class,
Yeah.
So all the guys here at the airport, they're older. I let them drive the car. The first thing they did when they came out, I was like, how the hell do you get this thing to work? This is the dumbest system I've ever seen in my life. They hated it. But you get into a Tesla, people love it.
So I think, one, there is an evolution. And the addition of zero layer makes a huge difference. And I think design is never done. It's just due.
Oh, I completely agree with that.
And so that allows us to continuously iterate. And the advantage now is that we have over-the-air capability where we keep improving the product for the customer.
What about, okay, this is my normal viewers know this is what's coming right now. You may know what's coming. I get the whole over-the-air. I'm with you. Like, I understand. I like me some of the functions, but I'm also the guy that got mowed down by a 6,000-pound Tesla as a pedestrian because the person wasn't paying attention. I firmly believe that you need to have toggle switches, knobs, and everything like that. And I know that hampers your ability to do over-the-air updates. But how much of that safety issue is part of this execute and waste money but not time?
I think that, so again, goes to what does a company stand for? What is in your DNA?
Well, for you guys, it's safety.
Exactly.
I got a Pagoda SL that was the first car to have the cage built into it and was a convertible before Volvos did this. So,
so we, on everything we do, we ask that question about safety first. And even internally, when we're modifying a vehicle for development purposes, possibly not even take it on the road, the steps we go through to assess the safety is absolutely key. I was just this week at a training where I was trained and tested to drive a car that would have self-driving capabilities, driver assistance systems that wouldn't behave the way you expect them to.
Jerky, like you're like a 13-year-old's driving them.
But what if suddenly, you expect the car to hold the lane and suddenly for some reason it wants to go into the oncoming traffic lane? And I mean, I respect our level 3 test drivers phenomenally, because what you're doing when you're doing level 3 test driving is you're sitting in a car that is driving itself. But you need to focus the entire time as if you're driving the car. But you're not driving the car is driving itself. And then if there is some ghost signal or so, you need to be able to immediately react. It's actually quite stressful. And so even I, in my role, had to take that training, had to take that exam, so that I'm allowed to drive vehicles that have systems and development on them. That's how far we take safety, is that I'm not exempt from that kind of stuff.
Does that mean we'll have some sort of happy medium between the screens and iPads in the car and old-fashioned knobs and toggle switches?
I'm firmly convinced that we will have both. And I think it depends on the function. But there's also things like haptic feedback.
Doesn't work. I know you Silicon Valley types want to sell that idea. It doesn't work.
I'm firmly convinced it does work when it's well done and designed in a holistic way. We disagree with you on that.
I'll send you my hospital bills. How about that?
The question is for what function?
I agree with you. In some things, it's fine. But when it's high-use functions like HVAC, switching on and off the heated seat, some like navigation functions, things you're going to use very frequently, volume. But things that are buried, like I'm going to change the individual configuration on the suspension, no, that's haptic feedback. That's fine. We're talking about 5 things that need to go back to the old way to maintain safety. That's my feedback back to you.
Mm-hmm. And I think we could look at individual use cases, and they may also differ from user to user. So there is some like volume. I would totally agree with you. You need to be able to do that blind. Now with sensors, do you need to have a hardwired light switch to turn the light on?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when is the last time in your newer cars that you've touched the light switch?
I can't think of it. So that's one of those things.
So that would be for an example, and this then goes also into the question of regulatory. What are the regulatory requirements for that light switch? So I think we need to look at those scenarios. We also need to look at the fact, how does something work in the dark versus in daylight? How does it work for the 95% male versus the 5% female? We need to look at how does something in an emergency situation work. I've been as a passenger in a vehicle where I rolled over a couple of times and was on the roof. I needed to get out. I at the time knew, okay, which glasses are just glued in, and took my foot and kicked it out in order for us to get out. But I mean, those are also the situations in which a car needs to work and be safe and accessible to the occupants.
That's a good point to bring up. You have an unusual org structure. You're technically the CEO of research and development for North America, but the U.S. design studio actually rolls up to you.
Yes.
And I'm gathering by what we've just discussed, this is probably the biggest reason why, because this design has a big impact on the things we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I don't tell the design team here what something should look like. And we talked about that before. It is that we have those designers here looking with the US angle. I mean, it's a matrix, and in the end, it's key that these things come together. I here bring not just an operational, but also a US customer mindset to the table, and that is what is a key part of my role.
Situations where it's the tail wagging the dog, because yeah, you work for a German car company, but you're kind of the view into Silicon Valley. So I would argue this market dictates more back to headquarters. Is that true?
I try to avoid the term dictate.
Spend me a guy who grew up in Munich. So no celebrations at the Hofbrau house then.
I think I'm a firm believer. Don't make people do, but let people do. So with that,
You are a smooth operator, man. The more I spend time with you, the more.
well, that's a quote my PhD advisor Larry Leifer. I didn't come up with that myself. To your point about stealing, so I stole that from him. But so with that, I think you get a whole lot further by showing people opportunities and getting them to understand that why they would want to do this.
Oh, I get it.
Than applying the pressure.
Yeah. I do it with my interns. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, let's switch gears here, literally.
Yes.
2 things. Number 1.
I know you're still a gearhead.
Absolutely. I mean, come on. We're surrounded. What did you call it? You said you wanted me to rename my show from Inside the MotoMan studio to Inside the Man Cave? Yeah. Yeah. So I'm still a Neanderthal in this area. Anyway, you've done all of this moving around, all these different machinations of your career. It's been a fascinating journey. At any point, did you stop and say, I'm going to get myself a cool car? And it can't be a new Mercedes.
It's a great question. We talked earlier about the point of me being more into the new luxury vehicles.
Yes.
Than into the sports cars.
Well, you could have like an old, like a Mercedes 300 SC, something like that.
Yeah, I'm very much. I like the technology and the forward looking.
So basically, no cool cars in your garage.
So I would rather have like this EQS SUV or so, going after what is the next thing.
I get it.
I can get to play with that. And some years ago, we had a 93 Volkswagen Cabriolet. It was the very last year of the original handle Bopsy Pininfarina design.
Your wife had this.
Exactly. My wife and I had that. And it was most of the time sitting in the garage. It needed here and there some work. So, always something with the older cars. And then we said, oh, it's just sitting too much. It's collecting too much dust. Let's sell it. So I posted on Craigslist. Yeah. People came, complain about this and that. You know how it is when you buy a used car. You're trying to make the other one, the seller, realize they should lower the price. So they did that. Somewhere I said, no, let's not sell it. A couple of months later, back on Craigslist, finally, we ended up selling it. I told my wife, so when you look at the garage now, do you feel you miss it or do you feel relief? And she said, she feels relief. And I said, I feel the same way. I don't think we're the people for a vacation home because we're not going to enjoy it. It's going to be more pressure to us that we have to use it. So I'll now much rather go on vacation somewhere.
Yeah.
And rent a car.
Yeah.
And then I'll rather pay for the upgrade.
So I got to ask, how does a guy with like 85 degrees meet his wife?
So we met in St. Louis, Missouri.
College sweetheart?
Freshman year of undergrad. At a square dance on the top of a parking garage. Freshman orientation.
This is going out to Philip's wife. Please, oh please, oh please, can send me a picture or a video of him square dancing. I will pay you money for this.
Luckily, I don't think that exists. So it's a record. I think that might end my career if they did.
Okay.
Yeah, and she was, to your point, and she's from St. Louis.
Midwestern girl. I'm proud of you.
So when she first met me, I was like, why would you come from another country to St. Louis when all she was trying to do is get out? So now we are...
And now you're both Californians.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you're both kind of weird. Okay, so now we've come full circle. You know how the ending goes because I sent you previous episodes. What are the 3 aspects, attributes, points of your life, could be any one of those, that led to the success you are today?
Well, three aspects that
The
look
attributes,
to
aspects, whatever you get to choose.
I think first of all, very supportive and forgiving parents.
Okay, that's a very good one. They must have been incredibly forgiving, especially with that Audi.
That I think was fine. There was a lot of other things that I broke along the way.
That'll be another episode.
So I think then an incredibly understanding, forgiving, and supportive wife. I mean, I've spent now more than half of my life with her.
So she must be a saint.
So she's moved many times with me and for
Did
me.
you guys ever move together to Europe?
Yes, we did.
How long was she there?
So we were back when I was in Switzerland. Moved together. She followed me a little later because she did have a job, and then we've been traveling there quite regularly together. She also speaks enough German as that at home the family language is English, but we can speak. I can speak German with the girls, and she can fully comprehend the conversation.
Okay, so we've got
Parent,
very understanding parents and forgiving, very understanding and forgiving wife. What's the third that led to the success of Dr. Philipp?
I would say a continuous just quest for learning. And if there is an opportunity, just grab it. I think that is if any interns, co-workers, students at Stanford or so that I meet with, I say, when there is an opportunity, think of what all is possible, not what could all go wrong.
Okay.
And I think it's reacting in the moment. There is no master plan. There is a next step, and you probably heard of the Steve Jobs Stanford graduation speech.
Oh, absolutely. Watched it many times.
So that was my master's graduation.
Yeah.
And it's you connect the dots in the rear mirror.
Steve Jobs
that was my Stanford master's graduation.
You know, I don't like you anymore. I really don't. The things that have happened in your life is too cool.
But you know, it was the opening he did.
Stay hungry and stay foolish.
Exactly. But
you are hungry and foolish. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And he opened saying, this is the closest he will ever come to a college graduation.
That's true.
And at that point, I mean, we're there as graduate students graduating. So we're like, okay, we're already screwed. We're not going to have that success.
Well, on that note, this has been I'm not just saying this because you brought a fancy car, pre-production car at that. This has been an educational experience for me. It kind of reminded me of things that I should not have forgotten. Sir, thank you very much for
being
down here and coming to the hangar. We'll have to have you come back again and talk some more on tech stuff. I'm going to get you to put some knobs and toggle switches back on your car. Matter of fact, you guys can yell at him about that for me in the comments below or via social media, MotoMan TV, all word, MotoMan TV, all one, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And with that, a little bit behind the scenes here. Before we started shooting this, we were going to take a walk down to the other. So there are 3 hangars that we shoot in here. This is MotoMan Studio C. The one you guys normally see is MotoMan Studio A. Well, apparently the CEO of Mercedes-Benz Research and Development, his executive meal this evening, Golden Arches. So I see you guys in the next episode. Bis später.